My experience in talking to people about this is that they simply don't understand what's about to happen.
There's not much quibble. There's not much controversy among people in the know.
We have entered into a new phase of modern history. One that we desperately need to understand.
You know, there's been a great decline in maybe 70 countries now that are below replacement fertility.
Replacement fertility is the number of childbirths per woman that is required to replace the existing population.
We're going into a new era.
Why is this aging, and why is this demographic winter occurring?
It's happening in rich countries, it's happening in poor countries, it's happening in Catholic countries, Islamic countries, and that is everywhere people are having fewer and fewer children.
When fewer children are born, there are proportionately more elderly. This is called an aging population.
The world for the last 200 years has been population increases pretty much in all countries. So that's the challenge, to try to first understand why it's happening and then some consequences.
The reason the world has experienced a population explosion over the past century is not because human beings suddenly started breeding like rabbits. It's because they finally stopped dying like flies. What's really driven up human numbers has been a health explosion.
The population of children in the world has already declined. And yet, world population will probably grow by another 1.7, 1.8 billion. It's a paradoxical reality until you do the simple arithmetic to see what's happening to the population of different age groups.
Certain population reduction in at least some countries, and in many countries without immigration, enters us into unknown terrain where there are potentially very significant negative consequences.
Subreplacement fertility a generation and more ago means that the working age population, aged 15 to 64, is going to be slowing and then peaking and then declining more or less indefinitely as far as the demographer's eye can see.
In previous eras in which we had manpower shortages, we resorted to things like slavery and indentured servitude. And gradually, as the world population took off, beginning in the 18th century, we freed more and more categories of people from slavery, from debt peonage.
Most people think, because they've seen it all their life, real estate only goes up, they're not making more of it, population's growing, and real estate doesn't always go up. It was down a lot of the early 1900s, and particularly in the 1930s in that depression.
Northern Italy and parts of Spain, with fertility rates below 1, homes in abandoned villages all around Europe.
First, there's few births. Fertility rate is very low. It's 1.38 in Europe, whereas the rate needed for survival is 2.1.
While Western Europe is experiencing low fertility, parts of Eastern Europe are already experiencing population decline.
From 1989, for example, to 2002, the population has decreased by 13%.
The United States will face severe problems even before population itself may begin to decline.
Imagine if all your taxes went for nothing but Social Security and Medicare, and you still didn't have health care as a young person. All right, so we face real challenges here.
Low fertility levels, which is the main cause of declining populations, means we don't have so many people in working ages compared to those who are retired and collecting retirement and other benefits. How are we going to finance it in the future?
It's also true that never in history have we had economic prosperity accompanied by depopulation.
Modern economies need growing populations, which means that every developed nation needs immigration.
Developed countries would say that there's no problem with aging because they can make up the lack of labor force by immigration, which is happening today, especially in Europe, Australia.
This will mean greater out-migration from the poor countries. This out-migration is basically young, it's basically male.
And that is very serious for several reasons, but I mean the two that I like to point out is one is the labor productivity is decreased in the developing country because there's no labor force. They are overseas. And second, the generation of human capital, because those children are growing up without a father.
Well, human capital refers to the knowledge, skills, information that people have. Modern economies are based on information and knowledge. Not physical strength, but mental command of different types of information and skills. So it's the foundation of modern economy. Any economy that doesn't have substantial investments in its people's human capital won't be able to become a modern or a rich economy.
It would be ironic and it would be very unjust that the poor countries should come out to bail out the rich countries because the rich countries have been delinquent in doing their homework to keeping up stable and strong families, and then they themselves would lose theirs, bailing us out.
This chapter is about the American family and why it is that the United States is having enough children to replace itself, more or less. I think many people would say it's Hispanic immigrants that are having children fairly early, having 2 or 3, when Greece and Spain and France and Italy and Japan and Russia, all of Eastern Europe, have fertility that's much below replacement.
Mexico has experienced an incredible birth dearth. The decline in fertility in Mexico is without precedent in world history. Americans have this vision that there'll always be Mexicans trying to come across the border and that we need some huge wall to keep them out. Well, careful what you wish for, because not only in Mexico, but throughout Latin America, we're seeing these dramatic declines in fertility.
60% of U.S. population growth since 1990 has come from immigrants and their children, mostly Hispanic immigrants.
We came up in 1988 with an extremely simple indicator. I found it because I had the S&P 500 long-term on one side of my desk and the birth chart for the baby boom on the other side, and I realized the charts looked identical, put them together, 45 to 50-year lag. Take 1961, which was the peak year of baby boom births before births turned down, and add 48, the average spending, that gives you a peak around late 2009. So it really is that simple. Baby boomers earn and spend more money till around late 2009, and then they slowly earn and spend less money, and the stock market simply follows that, because it's not their savings and investment habits that drive the stock markets, which some economists think. It's spending, because spending drives the earnings of companies.
Adam Smith, probably the greatest of all economists, once wrote that prosperity is associated with growing populations, and depression, he didn't quite use that word, but he meant that, is associated with declining population.
couples.
Cohabiting couples tend to have fewer children than married couples, and it also pushes the age of marriage up and up. And one of the biggest reasons for the low fertility is people have children too late.
As a society, we don't like to talk about the causes of fertility decline. We don't want to possibly offend other people.
The child thrives on the relationship between the parent, not necessarily on the relationship to father and mother, which are both good individually for the child. But what really causes the child to really thrive is when father and mother are really together.
Most kids who grew up in a single mother household, I was raised by a single mother myself, most kids who are raised by a single mother or raised in a step family, for instance, turn out okay. That's in fact true. At the same time though, and we have to be, I think, very honest about acknowledging this, kids who are raised outside of an intact married household are much more likely to experience problems. I've done a lot of work looking at trends in the US, showing that kids who are reared outside of an intact married family are more likely to suffer from things like poverty, child abuse, depression, delinquency, etc.
I think a social contract is a great metaphor for the relationship between adults and children in a society. Where I think things are less happy is in the general sense that adults have an obligation to children generally.
Definitely not fair for the children, and I think that the children are not necessarily going to come through with their part of the social contract either.
When we have a divorce culture, and even a single, overall, a more general single parent culture, what we are really saying is that the happiness of adults is so much more important than the well-being of children.
I think that in this generation of current young adults, there's a great deal of awareness that the older generations haven't done very well by them.
The sexual revolution also has meant that it's not as socially stigmatized for women to have children while unmarried. It used to signal that they were having sex while they weren't married. Well, duh.
The result of all this is that the percentage of out-of-wedlock births grows, and now is up to nearly 40%.
Young women who find themselves pregnant, don't have a suitable spouse, have the baby anyway.
Well, when so many children are born out of wedlock, they tend, not always, but they tend to not get as much parental investment and involvement in the very early stages.
The family is a key for the generation of human capital, moral capital, and social capital.
Now, since learning begets learning, you start out with less learning there, and then you can't learn as much when you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when you don't have as much when you're 7, you can't learn as much when you're 8.
Economies to register growth, to show growth, need these three elements. Otherwise, productivity, the environment where the market operates and economic activities take place is jeopardized.
And in those formative periods, the family structure, all the studies suggest, is not the only factor involved, but it's certainly important. So yes, those children born in those environments are at a significant disadvantage compared to children born in traditional two-parent caring families who spend a lot of time with them when they're young, and by age 6 or 7, they're way ahead of the other children.
I have for some time been researching the idea of sustainable development and the family. And my basic idea that you cannot have sustainable development if you don't have a sustained family.